A very good morning to respected Dean Professor Sanjeev Ratna Singh, esteemed guests, revered faculty and fellow dreamers. As dawn breaks upon the final day of Deeksharam 2024 at the Times School of Media, we gather not the weight of conclusion, but with the promise of a new horizon. Today, we embark on a voyage to chart the uncharted waters of Indian journalism, where the challenges are the compass and opportunities the guiding stars. We are privileged to have with us today a distinguished figure in Indian journalism, Mr. Madhavdas Gopalkrishnan, the Senior Executive Editor for India's leading news channel, Times Now and Mirror Now. With a remarkable career spanning 23 years, Mr. Gopalkrishnan has been an integral part of the dynamic media landscape in India. His journey includes extensive reporting from Srinagar and Bangalore, and a pivotal role in shaping the coverage of major national news events. As the head of a team responsible for assignment desk and reporters for both Times Now and Mirror Now, he has been instrumental in breaking numerous high-profile stories, including the revealing narco tapes of Samjhauta blast accused Sardar Nagori and the expose on VVIP racism in aviation. He has also been at the forefront of covering crucial events such as the Kulbhushan Jadhav case at the International Court of Justice, the recent G20 summit, and several elections. Mr. Gopalkrishnan is an alumnus of the Asian School of Journalism, Chennai. Today we are excited to have him share his expertise on charting the future of journalism in India, challenges and opportunities. Let's extend a warm welcome to Mr. Madhavdas Gopalkrishnan. I now request Reverend Professor Dr. Sanjeev Ratna Singh to felicitate our guest with a sapling of gratitude. Felicitate him with a huge round of applause.
Hello, check. Hi, good morning, everyone.
Good morning, sir.
How's it going? So, before Madhav starts, I just want to give a brief intro. You heard the intro. I've had the honor of working with Madhav, and I think we were a part of the launch team of Times Now, and we spent 1 month in Mumbai together. And we've seen many ups and downs together, and when this program was happening, he was on top of our list of people whom we wanted to call, but we were not sure because, as somebody who's got so much of responsibility of running 24-hour news channels, time is of essence, but we are very grateful that he found the time to come and spend some time with us. So please listen to him carefully because he has seen it more than anybody else, and he will share his experience with you, and that will come in handy for you as well. So once again, Madhav, thank you so much for coming, and I'll hand over the stage.
Hi guys. So let me begin with what is the subject that we're going to be discussing today. I was told, and before I want to actually begin this lecture, I want to understand how many of you are undergraduate students, how many are postgraduate? Undergraduates, how many? Most. Okay, most. And postgraduates are how many? Just one? That's it? Okay, great. And how many of you are from Delhi NCR? Raise your hands. So that's almost most of you, right? So the reason I'm asking you these few questions is that in terms of me addressing and making you understand certain issues, because the basic subject that we're talking about today is charting the future of journalism in India, challenges and opportunities. In terms of where the media is today, where the media is say about 20 years ago, 24 years ago when Sanjeev and I were starting off in this career, we've seen it change drastically. The media that you see today, where there's social media happening, there is obviously there are tons of websites, there are specialized websites, that's not how it was. So we were dependent on very different kinds of sources in terms of media, and how it's evolving with technology, with political changes, with all sorts of things happening. It's been very interesting. So I'm going to sort of outline that very briefly for you, and also towards the end look at how things are going to change, or we're expecting them to change. And this is going to be very important for you guys, because you have another 30-35 years of your career ahead of you. So understanding how these changes have happened will give you a good perspective on what to expect from here on. It's obviously not going to be the same thing. There's going to be a lot of changes. So I would like to also keep this interactive and keep, you guys can ask me questions, etc. if there's anything confusing that you don't understand. So last 2 decades I want to begin with, that we have about 30 languages in India, right? So this is what makes our media, not just news, but even entertainment media. And I'm going to start a little bit with television, because broadcast is my area and I understand a lot of you are interested in that. How many of you want to be news anchors? Okay, that's a fair number. So you would have to understand how television works. Alright, now in terms of how these various languages impact, English and Hindi of course are our largest in terms of national news organizations. But remember that in terms of the actual reach in regional news, whether it is Bengali or Gujarati or Marathi or Tamil or any language it may be, that is where a lot of the news actually happens today. It's very important to know this. None of you may actually end up working in a regional place, you may or may not, but it's very important to know this, because this diversity is somewhere very, very important in terms of how our media is structured. It's important to know that as well. In 2000, the number of our regional news channels, etc., we had was about 3. In 2010, it was 82. In 2005, from 10 Hindi news channels, they had grown to 18 in 2005 and 18 in 2010. And English news channels, we saw 2 in 2000, to 6 in 2005 and 9 in 2010. So I'm just giving you this as an example to show you that proliferation of news in terms of how it has grown, in terms of how channels have grown. English, Hindi, regional, there's a world of difference. Here we're talking about 3 to 82, and English and Hindi we're talking about growth from 3 to 18. This is over a 10-year period. And pretty much it's been the same. Your English news channels nationally are pretty much the same. Few channels have come, few channels have gone up the scene, but there's still predominantly about 6 or 7 of them. Now, in 2020, news channels have comprised 43% of the total number of registered channels in India, which is huge, because I don't think anywhere in the world we have such a huge proliferation of news channels. And along with the TAM data, do you all know what the TAM data is? Are you aware of how ratings are done? Has anyone spoken to you guys about this? Or is this a completely new area? TAM, bar, sorry?
It's new for them.
It's new for them, okay. So just to, I'm not going to get to the specifics, just for you guys to understand, there is a system of metrics, and perhaps you guys can have a separate lecture on that. The TAM used to be the way that used to be collected earlier in terms of how channels are watched, which channel is watched more. It gives you specific data of the age group of the person, the location of the person, and in terms of the amount of time spent, so a minimum of 1 minute is recorded. It was earlier a TAM system, and then there were some changes that were brought in. It was then a BARC-led system. It's called the BARC, or the Broadcast Audience Research Council. It's available online every week. You can go and check the BARC website, and you can get the genres of news, of English news, of movies, etc., etc. All of this is available online. Just to make you understand that this is something that advertisers use to look at the popularity of each particular channel. Now, according to the TAM data, in 2010, news genre had 31% share of ad volumes, followed by general entertainment channels. They had a 27% share. So Indians also watch a lot of news. Now this changes with big news events. Like for instance, if there is a election happening, obviously the audience will be more interested in knowing what is there in terms of this election, who said what, where the political fight is happening. Perhaps before they go out and vote, they want to know what are the big issues in their state or in the country. So this changes. It's not a constant. but the audience and the universe as far as the news itself, the news genre itself keeps expanding, keeps coming down. And of course, if there's a World Cup match, people would rather watch cricket on TV, right? So this changes. It's a very normal thing. It happens up and down. But in terms of the data in 2020 pre-COVID, this is the news genre led with 30%. Hindi news, and this is data of 2022, data of 20 that came out in 2022, where Hindi news remains the second best language genre in terms of not just the advertising, but also in terms of viewership, etc. What's therefore very important is that channels are constantly trying to get more viewership, all right, and in the context of getting more viewership, because that's where they get their advertisements, because they also have to pay salaries, they also have to pay for their equipment, they have to pay for the rental of the cars that they hire, they have to pay for the OB vans, the live views, etc., etc. So that's how it works from the commercial aspect of it. Now, in terms of newspapers, this is as far as TV is concerned. We've actually seen, India is one of the few countries in the world where newspapers continue to grow. When I was, studying journalism about 23 years ago, we had this one very senior journalist come in and talk about how in 10 years, newspapers are going to die, it's going to be all online, and there's only websites that's going to happen, and all news will be consumed online. Now 23 years hence, that's not the case. Newspapers are still growing in this country. Yes, online is growing. Yes, TV is growing, but not as fast as it perhaps was 20 years ago. So newspapers in India, particularly in rural India, where the literacy levels continue to be, areas that people are working on, newspapers are still something that are growing. There are challenges, for instance, the high newsprint prices, etc. I think there are print experts who will tell you this, but I'm just going to give you the kind of revenues that newspapers have been earning. It was 20,000 crores in the pre-COVID 2019. And of course, it's also, in 2021 came down to about 16,000 crores, 18,000 crores in 2022, and 19,000 crores in 2023. Why I'm giving you this data? It's not specific to journalism, but I think it's very important for you guys to know that journalism doesn't work in a vacuum. There are obviously the other side of things in terms of how the business runs, and this is just to give you a broad overview of, the way the industry works, etc. Digital is the third and perhaps the fastest growing. For many, it's the most exciting, because India has the second largest digital population in the world. It's 468 million, and the time spent online has increased by 32% as recently as 2020. And post-COVID, I think this figure has actually gone up a lot more, because we're reading a lot more news online, we're consuming a lot more news online, we're spending more time online in terms of meetings, etc. that we conduct. I don't know if you guys know this, but there are entire news channels, and news channels are a very, very logistically challenging operation to run, because if you come and visit our newsroom, how many of you have been to a newsroom? Have any of them been to any of the facilities? Yeah, great. So you understand that the way news flows, you have to be fast, you have to be competitive, you have to put news out before your competitors, and all of this is happening real time. Technologically, there's a lot of backup that happens, not just in terms of IT, but in terms of the kind of broadcast equipments that you have, where the signals come to the office, where you're processing all the feeds together, and then you're putting it out for the viewers to see. There's a lot of logistics that's involved, and it was virtually unthinkable pre-COVID that we could do all of this sitting at home. But except for a few functions, I think about 99%, everything we managed to do everything in an automated way. There were, conference calls happening, there were all sorts of things happening, etc. That we managed to transfer the entire broadcast, the way that we functioned, at that point of time, online. And that has actually changed the way that we work permanently in some ways, in terms of physical meetings not happening, for instance. Video conferences were there earlier, but now it's part of our system. It's part of, people reporting. Pre-COVID, for instance, you'd see reporters giving phone calls. They still happen, but now there's, every phone has a WhatsApp video, every phone has a Teams call. There are a number of ways in which Skype, etc. A number of ways in which we reach out and utilize those softwares a lot more. So this is just to give you a sense of what's happening in terms of online, what's happening in terms of TV. Also, it's an interesting thing. This is a FICCI Ernst & Young report of 2024. And this has come out to say that they expect digital media to outpace television as the largest media segment in 2024. So it's something that's been predicted all along, and the pace at which digital has grown is in fact going to be far more than even television or broadcast in this particular year. Reuters has predicted that in its digital news report, that almost half of Indian respondents use YouTube, WhatsApp, while Facebook and X are becoming less popular. So for people like me who started using social media, it was Twitter, it was Facebook. But now actually it's coming down. It is a huge statistic in terms of interest for us, because the way that social media users use television, use these social media platforms, whether it's YouTube, whether it's WhatsApp, that changes also the way in which we perceive the news or we put out the news to them. For instance, are we now going to post more of our bulletins, more of our news capsules on YouTube? That's a conscious editorial call that we have to take in consultation with others, but that's the way we function from here on. YouTube, on WhatsApp for instance, there are clips that go viral. So are we going to now ensure that we as an organization push more things on WhatsApp? And if Facebook and Twitter are not going to be so interactive, remember that a lot of our political discourse, both in India as well as abroad, happens on X. Because here you have a very different situation. Earlier, when there were journalists who would have to get a communication from a politician, say the Prime Minister or the leader of opposition, there would perhaps be a press release that would come. Earlier, it would be a physical copy that would come in a fax machine in a newsroom, or there would be an SMS that would come later, or much later, perhaps an email that you would get on your phone or wherever laptop you can access, and then put it out as news. Now, all they need to do is what? Tweet, right? So they just put out an entire statement, and it's there not just for the journalists to pick up, but for their own followers to pick up. So in terms of actually the kind of way in which that interaction happens between politicians, communicating to the masses, and also through that to the media, through journalists, etc., all of that has gone a radical sea change. And that's why these things are very important, because on Facebook you may have 1 million followers. People may actually be following that particular individual or a set of individuals that they might want to look at from the news or other perspective. But if that popularity of that platform is coming down, then how do they change, and how do we as media look at that change and incorporate that within our own working styles? So in that sense, there is of course, this is broadly the kind of media landscape. Also, another interesting thing in social media that I find is that apart from YouTube and WhatsApp, TikTok is another one that's interesting. Of course, in India that's not the case, but this is a Reuters global report as well. A large number of people depend on Twitter for news as well. So this is pretty much as far as the media landscape that I want to talk to you about. Now, what are the challenges before Indian media? This is something that is very interesting. The first thing that I would say, and perhaps the biggest challenge for us as journalists, is how do you prevent against disinformation and fake news? Because remember, it's very easy. There could be a WhatsApp forward, it could be a link of an article, it could be a post that's made or a claim that's made on social media. The big challenge today is that how do you avoid this disinformation and fake news? And interestingly, there are a number of surveys, there are a number of studies that have been done that fake information spreads much faster. It spreads far more than accurate news, and there's a reason for that, because the fake news will probably be something so fantastic, something which is so unbelievable that people actually want to click and read that. But by the time the news very often is corrected, the damage is done. And fake news can actually be very detrimental in terms of not just defaming a person, not just in terms of giving a wrong information about an individual, but it can also go as far as to create replication of violence, for instance, in society. Suppose a particular video of violence is put in a wrong context, it can actually, the video may be original, but the context may be totally wrong. That can actually lead to violence, and there are cases, which have been reported of such kind of violences that have actually been reported. So fake news in that sense has, it's a huge problem for us, particularly in terms of social media, because the way in which a lot of this fake news is carried is largely disseminated through social media. And the global average, as far as this particular Microsoft survey in 2019 is concerned, the global average of users, encountering fake news is 57%. India is higher at about 64%. But this is again what we're talking about 5 years ago. I think this figure would be far more. Also, another big problem that is related to fake news is deep fakes. 75% of Indians present online and surveyed by McAfee have seen some form of deepfake content in the last 12 months, and at least 38% of them have said that they've encountered a deepfake scam during this time in its survey. Now, this is huge. Why is this huge? Is that the kind of artificial intelligence technologies that exist today it makes it very hard for you to tell if something's real or it's actually a deepfake. There are a number of videos of celebrities. Have you guys seen those videos of celebrities? The deepfake celebrity videos that have gone online? Anybody? Who did you see? Whose video did you see? Rashmika, yeah. Virat Kohli. Okay. And? Okay. Anybody saw the Prime Minister's Garba video? Okay. But that's cricket. It's playing cricket. The Prime Minister's Garba video when he flagged, incidentally that particular video was of another individual, but it's a concern because it's a concern on multiple levels. See, it's a violation of an individual's privacy, A. B, it could be defamatory, there could be an action that they've committed or a statement that they've not made that's being attributed to them. And guarding against deep fakes, currently there are cyber laws, etc., that guard against this. But in terms of actually, do we have enough to investigate this, to find out people who are responsible for it? These are going to be test cases because Rashmika, Kajol, Katrina Kaif, there's a huge number of celebrities, but it's not just about celebrities. As when we are reporting the news, for instance, politicians' deepfake video, has XYZ made such a statement or not made a statement? All of that, really hinges on, in terms of us as a news organization. Suppose you don't know that this is a fake and you put it out, it reflects very poorly on you as an organization. So the necessity to do fact checks, to actually look at the source of this particular information, is it coming from a credible source, is it coming from a verified source, all of this becomes a very, very important part of our job as journalists. So in terms of sourcing of information, if you have, for instance, a news agency, or you have a verified Twitter handle that's actually putting out information, or you have an actual source, who's associated with a political party or a PRO or a spokesperson, those are still okay. But the problem that comes is when you have unverified sources, and in the hurry to break news, very often news channels, news organizations, newspapers do make these mistakes. So these are going to be very, very important in terms of avoiding these pitfalls in terms of deepfake, because what ends up happening is that that news organization then will, or that reporter, whoever it is, will be held responsible for putting out fake news, reduces credibility in the long run, raises questions about the idea behind doing it, and therefore this is very, very important to safeguard from the perspective of how someone can do that. And in fact, perhaps you can get fact checkers. Today there are actually people who are specialized in fact checking and can give you the tools in terms of how you can very easily verify whether a video is real, whether it's not. An image, for instance, you can easily do a Google image reverse search and try and find out if that image is authentic or if it's actually mocked. When Vinesh Fogart was protesting at Jantar Mantar, there was a photo of her and her sister that was put out on social media, where after the protest, after the arrest, she was seen smiling. Did any of you see that? Not aware. Okay, you saw that. So essentially that was one of the first videos which actually came out, where we first saw how we actually saw how a fake image can be used to create a certain narrative which is not true at all. So the original photo, they were both arrested and took a selfie inside a bus. In the morphed image, they were both smiling inside the bus. So the spin that was given by those who were opposed to Vinesh Fogart is that she's smiling after being arrested, blah, 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 it's all just a game, so on and so forth. We've seen a fake Pentagon attack. Believe it or not, there was actually a photo of a missile outside Pentagon, which was an AI created image. And there were actually some news channels that put it out. Thankfully, we were not a channel that put it out, but those are the kind of real problems that actually happen, and you guys will be faced with, when you actually go out there in the real world to look at news in terms of, as a journalist or somebody working in the newsroom. All of you guys actually, let me ask you this, how many of you guys want to work in a newsroom? Everyone is wanting to be a journalist here? That's it? News. Journalist, newsroom, anchor, anything to do with news? Right, good. So, just to get a sense, interest in journalism certainly seems to be waning. And, right. Yeah. So when we were in journalism school, there were many people who wanted to straight away become editors before becoming reporters. So, yeah. Sounds familiar. So, just a couple of examples that I have of, deepfakes that have been used to actually dupe people. there were actually scammers in Kerala who duped a union government employee of significant amount of money because he received a call. Now these things are perhaps regular for you guys now, but a year or two back it was pretty unusual. Somebody used a friend's face and stole significant amount of money using an AI face swapping technology. There are other instances that I described to you of Vinesh Fogart, which was detained following the protests last year, 28th May, and there were two versions of the selfie that came out. There's an actress, Emma Watson. I don't know if you guys are aware of Emma Watson. Everyone knows Emma Watson? Yes. So Emma Watson was seen reading out Mein Kampf. Everyone knows what Mein Kampf is? Yes. Raoul Hitler? Yeah. So there was that. There was Greta Thunberg showing her calling for a sustainable war using tanks and weaponry, whether she's a anti-war activist. Several such cases. So this is, I think, the reason I'm spending so much time on fake news and deep fakes is that this is a very, very serious and a very real problem for media today, because even the best can get fooled. The kind of technology that's actually coming in, it's only going to get a much tougher and tougher problem to resolve, because you have these technologies, these websites, you can just download them and you can completely fake all sorts of videos. So the checks that need to be put in place in that sense are huge. And there's also, of course, monetization. I've referred to advertising revenue earlier. Increasingly, the change that's seen over here, well, of course, channels need to be watched very well, channels need to be viewed very well. The change in technology that's happening, the change in focus on digitization, there's a lot more change in social media. There are there are brands who consider certain types of news as being toxic and not wanting to associate with it. So there's a lot of change also happening in terms of the way that advertisers spend their money on media. And therefore, it's also very important for us as journalists, those who are responsible for the content, to ensure that we're safeguarding against all that. And while raising any issue might be legitimate, the point is that whether it's done in a well-balanced way, whether it's merited, whether it's well-researched when we're putting out, whether we're putting out enough context to each of these things, all of these are very important in ensuring that the journalism that we're doing or the content that we're putting out is actually very important. And increasingly, there is pressure on trying and doing stuff that is low cost. When we started in journalism, there were these huge DVC Pro or Beta cameras that used to come. Massive cameras, they're about this big. They used to weigh about 12-14 kilos, right? You would have to go with a cameraman, and there used to be these huge batteries, tapes that were massive, etc. Logistically, a huge challenge, right? As things went on, the cameras became much smaller, still had tapes that you had to work with, but much lighter. You could run around with them, you could do a lot more work, you could work longer hours. Things have now gone by where you have a chip in a camera, and the phone now is almost as good as actually having a camera. The smartphones and the kind of technology that you have today in your hand, you can actually shoot an entire documentary on it. You can put it out on air. That's the quality of technology that you have coming in today. And also with bandwidth increasing, the kind of heavy equipments that we needed. We needed, for instance, OB vans to follow us around, right? These huge vans. You all know what an OB van is? This van with a dish on top of it? There used to be some of them lying around on the back. Yeah, there are two. So imagine you're going into a small gully somewhere in Chandni Chowk trying to report with an OB van. How difficult will that be? Right? So if you have a small little box where you can, or a live view as it's called today, it makes your job that much easier. So technology will make work much easier, much simpler in terms of the actual costing of it, but there will also be challenges. The problem today, for instance, is the problem of plenty. You have a lot of options in terms of how you can actually do something, but choosing the right way is actually what makes a difference in terms of how effective you are as a journalist, how effective you are as a platform. The other issue, of course, and this is a perennial issue that we as journalists face, which is, of course, press freedom, whether there's going to be political interference. Perhaps no regime can be said to be completely innocent of that regard, and this is a concern that media globally has in terms of how much governments intervene as far as news and reportage is concerned. And there is pressure, obviously, that builds up from various political sides, not just the government, but even from opposition. But that's certainly, of course, very important, because what happens is that if a news report is wrong, what do you think a politician will do? Anyone? What will they do if they don't like your news? Sorry?
See what the news channel.
Exactly. So how do you safeguard against that? how do you safeguard against news by actually ensuring that there is, you know, a layer or a buffer that if someone sues you for defamation, you say, no, this is not true. We are merely quoting this source or this person or this information that has come out. That is, I think, something that we look at. But all of these are cases, and you know, an example, a typical example is governments need not sue you in one place. If they sue you in 24 places at the same time, you'll just be running around from Arunachal Pradesh to Kashmir to Kerala to Karnataka to Maharashtra. So there are all sorts of things that can happen in the past. Sedition and defamation laws, of course, are two other ways that you know, pressure is put on. There's censorship, etc. Recently, last night there was a big development. How many of you have seen the newspapers today? Raise your hands. One person's read the newspaper. Hello. App pe padhte hain. Everyone, how many people read the news this morning? I hope that's more. So there was a big development last night related to broadcasting and the media. Did anybody track that? Does anybody know what happened? So there was a broadcast bill that the government has withheld. Does anybody know what the broadcast bill had? Why it was controversial?
Censorship and the social media influences protection basically.
Correct. So the social media, so basically what that bill would have in effect done, I mean it's a much more complicated thing, but why it was so controversial, beg your pardon, is that all social media content creators, anybody on social media can, you know, would end up becoming liable to the same laws that broadcasters are. And this was being perceived by the opposition, by various media bodies, etc., as a violation and a crackdown on press freedom. And that bill the government has decided now to withhold. The draft is still there, but they're going to change certain provisions of it to bring in more safeguards. There's also, of course, you know, fact-checking units, for instance, that governments have set up that have been controversial in the past. Because the issue then is this, that, you know, you have in journalism, you have the opposition, you have the government version. If the government doesn't agree with a particular version, is it correct for the government to have a fact-check unit? And we've seen this replicated not just at the center, but also the level of the states, where there are various fact-check units, etc., that have been set up to, you know, separate what they call fake news and not, and what is not. The problem with that particular concept is this, that can the government be a judge in its own case, right? Can the government say that we believe this is wrong and therefore we're going to call this fake news? Or should it be by a third party which is not part of either the government or not part of the opposition and is not politically aligned, hence the media? So that's a question, that's a debate that has in fact been coming out, and we've seen in fact various fact-checking units that have come in. The way forward that I'm looking at in terms of that media largely looks at is more independent fact-checking that happens. Within news organizations today, you're seeing several of their digital wings, several of their news desks actually having a fact-check arm to look at whether this problem of deep fakes, whether this problem of artificially intelligence generated content, how that can actually be tackled. And that's actually something that perhaps is one of the ways forward. We're also looking at, in terms of credibility, how you engage the audience with that. And this is one way in which you can actually reduce that in terms of the fake news, etc., that we're talking about. And also, of course, in terms of storytelling itself, one of the things that you will keep hearing, not just here, but when you get into a job at some point of time, is how to keep the audience engaged. Because there's a difference. If you just look at the 5-6 newspapers that come out of Delhi, there is a difference in the approach of each of those newspapers, right? The kind of visual impact that you have Times of India, and to give an example, the Hindu, there's a world of difference. Why is that? The whole point is that there are some news organizations which are very focused on keeping the viewer's interest engaged. And that is perhaps one of the most challenging parts of the journalist's job, being a reporter, and also of course those on the desk, whether it's print, whether it's online, whether it's television, to keep the audiences engaged, to keep the news or present it in a manner where people look at it or engage with it for the maximum amount of time. And that is always a challenge, it's always a dilemma, it continues to be a dilemma. I mean, it was a dilemma when I was starting out my career, it will continue to be a dilemma now and in the future as well, because news stories change, the way people connect with a story changes depending on the situation and circumstance, and over a period of time there are issues that sort of become more popular or reduced in terms of popularity. So it's always a work in progress. which is why within a newsroom you always have discussions on how to treat a story, how do you present a story, how do you make it the most impactful story. You know, for instance, I'll give you an example of presentation, just to illustrate this. There was a statement made by a politician, I think about 12, 14 years ago, that food is available, 5 rupees की थाली मिल जाती है. So this politician was an 80-year-old person. So to illustrate the story, I went to a dhaba and I actually rolled the whole report and I asked the guy, 5 rupees, the guy who was selling a thali back then at 80 rupees. I said, 5 rupees thali mein kya milega? So he put 1 spoon of dal, 1 spoon of curry, 1 spoon of sabji and a piece of a roti. He says, 5 rupees ki ye milegi thali. The impact of that was that that story was carried the whole day. I'm not talking about my own visualization, but this is how you can visualize any story to make it sound like something that's absolutely ridiculous. Because we all know what 5 rupees can buy, right? You obviously will not be able to fill your stomach up. But this politician was in some other cuckoo land. So to try and show the viewers that this man is absolutely not with it, he's completely lost it. And this is the kind of politicians we have in the country. This was one way of presenting. I'm not saying that's the only way, but that's one way in which a journalist can actually bring a difference in terms of presenting it to the people that boss, what your politicians are saying, what your leaders are saying is either factually incorrect or it is something that people don't connect to, so on and so forth. Another thing that we've been seeing in the last 10-15 years growing a lot, and social media has had a massive impact in this, is citizen journalism. So today, if you guys have a Twitter account and you see something happening in front of you, you know, a bus conductor beating up a passenger, for instance, just an example, you can just shoot the video, put it on Twitter. This is something that did not exist 20 years ago. Many people believe that social media has democratized the news space in a lot of ways because you can actually connect, you know, with any instance of violence or bodily harm or some controversial comment. It may be a racist or a casteist comment that has been made. There are a number of such examples of things that you can capture on your phone and actually put out on social media. And this is actually, you know, it's making a huge amount of difference today. For instance, the manner in which our elections are conducted. I don't know if you guys are aware, the Election Commission has an app called the C-Vigil app. Okay? And this particular app, what it does is it expects voters, wherever they see a violation, whether they're standing in line, if you know, either at the booth level people are violating norms or certain political parties are actually getting, you know, preference over others, you can just put a video or a photo and your location there and it will actually be investigated. So I'm talking about not just randomly putting out things on social media which, you know, people may then get outraged and take action upon, but now governments, various bodies like the poll bodies, etc. are more aware of these technological tools and it's actually making an impact in terms of facilitating how things actually happen on ground. Also, of course, in terms of digital, the one big difference and huge potential that I see, and it's already happening in a lot of ways, there are already specializations of people who are getting into data journalism. What do you guys understand what I mean by data journalism? When you visualize, you know, certain contexts, trends, you know, it can be as simple as voting percentages, it can be as simple as literacy levels, it can be as simple as crimes that have happened in a particular area, say for instance crimes against women, which are the states where it's more prevalent, you know, where do kidnappings happen more, where have murders happen more. All those things are potentially things that are all data driven things that can happen, and the kind of visualizations, the kind of artificial intelligence that you have today which can help you present those to the viewers in an interesting way is far more. Mobile journalism, as I was talking about earlier, it's not just about being able to cover stories here, but the biggest impact in terms of mobile journalism has actually been felt in districts where, you know, the persons perhaps couldn't earlier afford you know, a camera, an entire setup, but they just need anybody with a smartphone. And I think a 10,000 or 15,000 rupee smartphone is more than enough where you can actually shoot videos. And that actually also leads to a lot more coverage in terms of the local stories, etc. As I said earlier, artificial intelligence, VR, etc. are certainly opportunities that are there. And interestingly, I just want to also share with you, I had done a little bit of this research yesterday, but I decided to just put out the topic of our talk today, the future of journalism in India, the challenges and opportunities that it presents. And I just put it out on Meta. Have any of you used Meta? on WhatsApp. Yeah? So I was actually shocked to see that the entire 2 hours of work that I had was done in 10 seconds by Meta. Okay, so that's the kind, and it's actually exactly the same thing. It's the corporate pressures, the digital disruption, the disinformation, changing media habits. Yeah, the one thing that of course it actually pointed out and we face on a regular basis are safety concerns. It's not just in terms of being sued, but there are actually very real possibility of journalists who go out there who face harassment, who face intimidation. For instance, you're doing your story against a politician who's also a goon, right? You're not going to find it very easy if you're reporting on XYZ's murder case and you're going to ask him a question, because people will come and probably intimidate you. We saw it recently what happened with that horrific incidents in Calcutta with the RG Kar hospital. The family says that the cops tried to intimidate them into saying that it was suicide or misinforming them. So, or perhaps bribing them, whatever may be the case. The point is that there's harassment, these are very real concerns that journalists actually face, and I think we've all faced this during protests. When Kanhaiya Kumar was presented in the court a few years ago, the lawyers there actually thrashed a lot of media. And Sanjeev and I know several of the journalists who were actually thrashed over there. So these are very, very real problems and very real issues that you'll face. And perhaps it's less of a problem here than, for instance, in areas where there is actual insurgency, like the Northeast or in Jammu and Kashmir, where there's a very, very real threat to journalists working there of terrorists actually coming out and either intimidating them or sort of opening fire to threaten them, or actually even some extreme cases, journalists being killed, right? If you're, for instance, in an encounter spot, what are the safeguards that you take to ensure that you're not in the line of fire, that you're away from both the police or the armed forces and the terrorists? So these are some very, very real things. These are not new to today. They've been existing, of course, in the past, but yes, these are, of course, certainly very, very important aspects of this. But yeah, to conclude, essentially, I think journalism will continue the way it has. There will, of course, be changes. It's only going to be about the mode of a change. We've been talking about digital, social media, changing television drastically. But news channels pretty much haven't changed in terms of their basic functioning, right? You still see clips, you still see news programs, you still see them on social media, and the way each consumer actually consumes the social media is very different. You have, for instance, short clips on Twitter, you have entire programs on YouTube, you have longer format documentaries on YouTube. The way in which the social media adapts to all of these and caters to different groups remains different. But one very interesting thing that we're looking at in terms of how social media and digital is changing things is how niche websites are functioning. There are a number of websites, for instance, that do video in regional languages, which have a very, very different approach. How many of you guys have seen, for instance, Lal & Talk? Have you seen Lal & Talk? Right? So that's an example of a niche. That's news. It's very hard hitting. It may be a little, some may choose to call it rustic, some may choose to call it in your face, whatever you choose to call it, but it's a different way of presenting news. And I think that's going to be one of the ways forward. Reaching out to specific audiences, reaching out to audiences and telling them what they want to hear in a way that they want to hear it. I think that's essentially what websites like these do. There will, of course, be more and more specific websites. There will be more localization of news. 5-10 years ago, we were told hyper-local is the way forward. Some of them have worked, some of them have not. Many of them have even closed down. So all of these are going to be technological things that are going to be experimented with and changed. But yes, news essentially, I think, is here to stay. There's going to be a lot of challenges. There's, of course, the challenge of sustainability in terms of ad revenue, so on and so forth. But I think the biggest challenge for news is to ensure credibility. And I think if that is there, the future of journalism is pretty solid. Thanks a lot. Yeah, questions, anyone?
Hello sir, my name is Om and I would like to say it was a really interesting session and we got to know a lot. So I want to ask you that being a news person, what are some of the biggest strengths and weaknesses that you face?
Strengths and weaknesses.
Yeah, in your work.
Okay. So that's a that's one of the strengths, of course, that you can communicate to a large audience. Obviously, there are people watching you. So I do 2 shows, for instance, on times now at 6 o'clock and at 10 o'clock. So obviously, there's a lot of feedback. So obviously, the strength is that if you put out a piece of information and put out the right perspective and reach out, for instance, to a particular demographic or a particular story to the person who needs help. For instance, how many of you guys, I'm sure you're all aware that there were UPSC students who died of drowning a few weeks ago in Rajendra Nagar. So what did the Delhi police do? Are you guys aware of that? They booked a guy. So they arrested the driver of a car who drove on that road which was full of water, and the water apparently broke the gate, and then the water went in and apparently drowned him. Which is ridiculous. How is that guy supposed to know that his driving his car is going to kill a few people? So we had his wife come and talk about that, and she spoke only 2 times on that particular day. And then you had the Delhi High Court, remark a few days later that there's a strange investigation going on, where the driver of the car has been arrested. The Delhi police then quickly went around to water down the case, and by the time there was nothing Tuesday on Wednesday, by the time the next hearing happened on Friday, Delhi police had ensured that the guy's out. But the court still observed that thank God you didn't book the rainwater for actually being accused. So these are the sort of things that happen, and very often as journalists we can make a social impact. The whole idea of joining or being a journalist is that you can make an impact on society. Sometimes it's not always possible, sometimes you can, and sometimes you can actually make a difference. So journalists have played a very important role, for instance, in bringing out corruption cases. When the Congress was in power, there were huge protests. Several of your professors here were journalists and very active at that point of time. So those kind of changes can be there as a media person. But from the point of view, I won't call it a weakness, but then journalists have to remember that they are not politicians or decision makers. They're just watchers and people who are reporting on a particular situation. And then it's for powers that be, whether it's the courts, whether it's politicians, whether it's bureaucrats, to then take action once we've put it out in the public domain. I hope that answers the question.
Yes.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, sir. So first of all, thank you so much for coming in. I have first-hand seen how important the presence of the executive editor is at Times Now, Mirror Now, or in any newsroom in general. So thank you so much for taking out the time. And secondly, sir, I am Shreya. I did an internship at Times Network in Mumbai during the summers, and I was a part of the TV team only at ET Now, and we used to create content for airing on TV, and we used to modify the content a bit for it to be live on YouTube. So I had also been a part of a lot of discussions which said that TV journalism or broadcast journalism, some used to say that it will completely shift to an online digital platform, and some say that a boom is expected in TV journalism at the same platform itself. So there are a lot of opinions on both the sides. So sir, what's your stance on this?
So I kind of addressed that because when I told you when I was in journalism college, there was one very senior editor, and I'm just going to repeat that. He said that in 10 years, newspapers, it's the end of it. Everything is going to be online, everything is going to be digital. That didn't happen. There's similar people who have these post-apocalyptic doomsday scenarios of television, which may not happen. Television's still there. But having said that, we will be looking at a format where television will probably have to evolve. See, we are in a situation where there is obviously convergence happening. And when you say convergence, maybe 20 years ago, nobody thought that you could watch news, TV news on a mobile. That's actually happened today. And as technology changes, as you have bigger processors on your phones, as you have more bandwidth in your airwaves, obviously things will change in terms of what you can do. You perhaps may not even need a laptop because already your smartphones are so smart. So how you consume television news might change. It's already changed. For instance, if you watch social media, you have a vertical screen, right? When you watch on TV, it's like this. It's a horizontal screen. So already vertical videos have started happening. So it's going to change the way, nobody can predict it. I'm not a soothsayer. It will change. The way it will change and the speed at which it will change, that depends on a number of factors, including how technology pans out, including how consumers accept it. Are people going to still watch news, for instance? I know a lot of people who've switched from DTH. and only watch online content, right? Now that is a significant change in how news viewership or even television viewership happens, whether it's entertainment, whether it's news, whether it's sports. Now, is that something that's sustainable? As bandwidths improve, as online platforms improve, perhaps we'll see the end of DTH and cable at some point of time. Is that going to happen across India though? It's going to take a very long time because there are people who might not be able to afford these technologies, right? As I said, there are people who are still getting literate and becoming literate, therefore they are buying a newspaper now which costs maybe 1 rupee or 2 rupees, and therefore you're seeing newsprint also in this. At the same time, even in regional journalism, they are huge online platforms. It's not like because they are a regional platform, they are not focusing on that area, because that is also a huge driver of content for them, and that's also where they have a huge amount of readership where they do not want to lose a pie. So nobody will be able to predict what will happen from here on. Digital will definitely be driving the growth. The format in which digital will drive the growth will depend on a number of factors which will play out over the next few years, and you guys will see all of that happening.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, sir. I am Priyanshi. My question is, there are many conversations happening around AI and journalism in the past couple of years. So as a person who is in television journalism, what's your take that whether AI will impact television journalism or not in the future?
So would you like to see artificial intelligence anchors on TV?
So I mean, it's weird, but yeah, we have been
It already
seeing.
exists.
Yeah, it already
It already exists, so that is one.
Yes.
There are a couple of things that I want to share with you. In fact, I just give you an example of me doing my research yesterday, spending a few hours, and in 10 seconds Meta had pretty much the same topics. What Meta did not have is the examples that there are, to actually back up these claims. They just had broad headings. Perhaps Meta can do that. I haven't explored Meta enough. But artificial intelligence will always have limitations. And when I say that, I mean that ultimately journalism is about human beings looking at news for other human beings and what will interest them. So what is there at the back of our minds? A computer, at the moment at least, will not be able to perhaps get to the depth of it. Its work, artificial intelligence, has changed a number of professions, like the legal profession for instance, where things are very, very sort of ordered. Things are very ordered, there is precedence, it's all a matter of record, it's a matter of procedure, etc., etc. Journalism is slightly different. Journalism is not like technically a science, it's more of an art. So, the human impact of, seeing a news story. When you write a script, you write it with a certain emotion, right? That will AI be able to do? At the moment, I don't think so. Maybe going along, AI will be able to do that. But yes, definitely at the end of the day, artificial intelligence, there is pressure on a number of companies to use more artificial intelligence to automate the systems for news gathering, for news selection, etc. But at the moment, whether it will totally replace human intervention, I have my doubts.
Hi sir, my name is Suhana and I think there is one more challenge. I know the world is very big in terms of news and everything happens every day.
Yeah.
But maybe there are some times when nothing major is happening, like not even something war or not even World Cup or some crisis. So how does news channel engage the audience on those days?
So that's a very good question. In fact, just yesterday we had a meeting to avoid these kind of situations. It's called a forward planning meeting. So obviously there is content that is required in terms of events that happen on a particular day. There are also things that happen parallelly which are not in your face. For instance, there are political controversies, there are statements, there are elections coming. You plan for the next set of events that you're going to see, something related to the next set of elections, Maharashtra election, Jharkhand, Haryana is happening. So can you do a story around that? Can you look at things which are not, in your face sensational, like this Bangladesh violence that has happened. There's this horrible story in Kolkata, this hospital story that has happened. There are, other big stories that may be, pending. And end of the day, I'll give you an example of Times Now. Times Now is a national news channel, right? So there are obviously regional news channels at the level of states. There are international channels like CNN, BBC. All of them are different in terms of their logistics and functioning. So we have a network of reporters, about 40 reporters across the country, and we tell them that, boss, this has not happened. What else is priority? What else is important? What else is of interest today? So we look at that then. And in terms of what you see in terms of news every day, it's a function. So those stories which on a big news day, like you're describing, might not have gone on air, then those stories become the stories of the day and they become more important. So it's always it's in a sense what you will learn through the course of journalism about the concept of an inverted pyramid. Does anybody know what an inverted pyramid is? Has anybody talked to you about it? It's about what is the most important news of the day followed by the next most important thing. It's a concept of writing an article. The same concept of prioritization comes when you build a page in a newspaper or a page in a digital website or building a rundown for television or in terms of your deciding and news selection of what are the stories of that particular day.
Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon, sir. Myself is Sneet. I wanted to ask, like, how do news channels deal with the political pressure? Like, we have seen always in debates, like, BJP is always, telling the anchor that you are, favoring Congress, and Congress is like, you're always favoring BJP. So how do you guys deal with that?
Don't pick up the phone. Simplest way.
No, but still, like, whenever on air, also you have to deal with situations like these, or the panelists from the Congress party, they just leave the panel. So how do you, like, deal with that on air?
So the point is to give everybody equal time. Try and be fair as far as you can. It's not always possible, and to please everybody, because even if you are fair to someone, there will be people who feel that you're being unfair to them. So there's no end to it. It's a chicken and egg problem. But as a journalist, you should be satisfied that you've done your fair job in giving both people a chance. I think that's about it, and then let the viewers decide if that person has been unfair or if you have been unfair. Leave it to that. There's a fight going on between one journalist and one politician right now. They just want to court. The court will decide if things come to that. But I think the challenge in today's environment where there is one narrative that the government wants to push and there is a narrative that opposition wants to push. I think the problems that were there in the last 10 years will now reduce a little bit because opposition is also stronger, they're more articulate. So these things will find a way of balancing themselves out. Our job as journalists is to represent both the sides. If we've done that, we're fine.
And sir, what are your views on the Indian political trends these days? Because like we have seen in the exit polls, like almost each and every exit poll, even most many famous exit pollers like Janki Baat, even they were not able to exactly declare that kitne like BJP was saying 400 bar, but then they were stuck at 240. So we don't know in a country like India, people will choose whom.
Yeah.
So how do you guys know that which political party is going there?
So do you know how exit polls are conducted? How many people do you think out of 140 crore they actually serve?
Some thousands.
Yeah. So can that ever be accurate? There's always a risk of exit polls going wrong. The point is they try to get the cephalological sample as accurate to regions, to gender, to age, to caste, to community, etc. of the larger sample in a particular constituency or a state or a country or the country, so on and so forth. So it's easier to get it right in a smaller area where you may actually be able to do a few thousand people and you're representing a few lakhs. But if you're representing 140 crores, the chance of it going wrong is always very high. It's not the first time that exit polls have been wrong. Sometimes exit polls have been right. Some agencies have a better track record than others, and you can look at that. I don't want to name any particular agency, but it's part of it. And at the end of the day, if exit polls are happening after the poll process has been concluded, then it's no way going to impact how people are going to vote, A. And B, it's just a way, frankly, when news channels, news agencies just engage, just look at what are the factors that have worked in this election. And exit poll data is forgotten the day that the result happens, because the result is obviously the final thing. It's going to finally tell you which community has voted which way, where they've gone, who has supported, who has not supported, and which states have moved which side, which areas have moved which side. So exit polls for those 2 days between the last phase of polls and counting, it's just a limited utility of those few days. Perhaps the narrative of those days are controlled by that. But end of the day, you have the counting data, and counting data is what everyone finally goes by.
Hello sir, myself Jyotiraditya Gupta, and I want to ask you that as print media is also developing nowadays, so they get the news and the newspapers are delivered to us the next morning when they get printed. So sir, how do digital media deal with the news? They also get the news at the same point of time, and actually the news which we see that is coming on night. So you need to you prepare the news bulletin according to that which news is prior.
So this is the difference between digital, TV and print. Okay. Print guys have it relatively easy, I'll say it at the risk of being in television, because they have only one deadline in a day, which is the deadline in the night, right? So they have a edition say at 10 o'clock, then they have a city edition, then they have a late city edition, they have districts, etc. There are multiple editions depending on each newspaper. They have their own formats and how many copies are printed, etc. etc. There are some newspapers with lesser copies who can update till like 1 o'clock in the night, 2 o'clock in the night. Digital and TV are similar in the sense that there is no deadline. When a story breaks, you have to have it, right? And you have to be on the ball, otherwise you will end up losing your viewers. So that's the challenge when it comes to digital and TV, where you're real-time updating. For instance, if a tragedy like the Wayanad landslide happens, the first reports that came, we were told like about maybe 5-10 people have died. You don't know it could be much more, but it's not official. So by the end of the day, we were told 50. Then the next day, we were told 100. Then the next day, we were told 200. So the point of television and digital is to keep updating stories, keep viewers abreast with it, and finally the total is I think over 400, right? So the point is you will have to keep giving the latest updates. You will have to keep viewers engaged. This is just one example, but there are multiple news updates that happen through the course of the day. Bangladesh, for instance, XYZ incident happened. Sheikh Hasina sitting in a plane running out. Is she landing? Is she taking off? What is happening? She's landed in India. Where in India? What is she going to do next? So the whole point of television and digital is that you actually see the kind of news process unfold. Right? When you're watching television, you can see, okay, this is the process. So, our swearing in ceremony, X person is arriving, Y is arriving, so and so minister, so and so prime minister, president of so and so has arrived. They're going to be sworn in, and now the government is formed. So you can actually see how it happens. The challenge, and that's why television and digital becomes more strenuous in some ways, is that you have to keep up and you have to ensure that you're up to date. So that's basically the difference. Of course, now newspaper reporters also have it very tough because they have to also, not very tough, they're doing what TV has been doing for decades now. They also are asked to provide updates on big stories, real-time basis for their respective websites, because viewers don't want to wait for the next day, especially online and social media. They want to know it as it's happening. So now print journalists also have that additional pressure of actually delivering news as it happens.
Good morning, sir. Hi. So my question was regarding agenda-driven journalism and how when you mentioned Bangladesh riots and everything. So the Economist has recently come under fire for being a biased reporter towards those riots, and BBC has come under fire for biased reporting on their riots in the UK against Muslims. So I want to know how Times, which is such a big, like the largest media house in India, more or less, how it deals with agenda-driven journalism in, like as you mentioned, in the elections, or as you mentioned, Manipur.
See, the point is this, that all journalism should be fair, right? You represent the other side, you represent one side, you represent the other side as well. That's the idea of all journalism. I don't think any news organization will, have a definition of journalism apart from that, except for maybe organizations that are ideologically driven, so on and so forth. The question is this, that, and you can actually answer this question through the course of your career as a journalist, and you'll still never find an answer, is that, is there something as unbiased journalism? BBC is a great paragon of, journalism, fair journalism, investigative journalism. But please remember that BBC is from where? United Kingdom, right? So the BBC also represents a pro-UK bias, right? CNN, Fox, CBS, maybe Fox is very right-wing in the US, but if you consider CNN, CBS, etc., which are considered more centrist, they also represent a United States perspective, right? Al Jazeera represents a Middle Eastern, and within Middle Eastern a Doha perspective. So no journalism is completely free of bias. Is something that you can look at when you see the coverage of each of these. There is CCTV, which is China, also it's called CGTN now, right? So CGTN represents the Chinese interest. You have NHK in Japan, which represents Japanese interest. You have similarly DW in Germany, which represents their interest. So if you talk about all the global media, they represent a certain perspective. The Economist represents a certain political ideology and a certain economic ideology as well. Their coverage, whether it's fair or not, is for the viewers to decide. And the point at the end of the day is to ensure that when you're covering an event, you're covering it from all perspectives. There will be opinion, there will of course be certain situations where a channel will take a stand. For instance, what's happening in this Arjikar hospital, or what happened to Nirbhaya 12 years, right? 13 years now, 12 years ago. Can anybody justify that? No, right? So channels take a position on that, they demand action, action is taken, and that's how there is some kind of change that actually happens in society. So channels also take a stand based upon what are the facts before them, what are the events that are unfolding before them, and then they decide internally whether they want to go ahead with the story in a perspective or a certain way. There's an example of Jessica Lal. Does anybody know the story of Jessica Lal? Yeah? So what happened in Jessica Lal's case is the trial was over. Because of a very intense media campaign, the case was reopened and the person was responsible was then held to account and then was sent to jail. Okay, so there are situations where the media also goes into campaign mode. Whether it's right or wrong, it's for an individual to judge. There are times when judges sort of go beyond their brief and they engage in what is called judicial activism. So these are all debates. Now, if you are the accused, for instance, in Jessica Lal's trial, then you say that this is trial by media, it is unfair. This is not what citizens should do, this is not what media should be doing. That's that person's perspective. So there will always be a debate in what is right and what is wrong. The point being media persons is that you should have the wisdom, you should have the knowledge, you should have the facts before you to be able to take an informed call of what's right, what's wrong, what's ethical, what's unethical. And these are all larger questions because there are 70 people in this room. What's ethical for 70 people will not be the same, right? But what's before us, how do we take that call? That's how we will evolve as journalists through the course of this course and through the course of your careers, right?
Good afternoon, sir. My name is Pranavi Ambati. I wish to ask, do news channels or in fact media at large prefer consumers of news media to be media literate, or would you prefer them to somewhere be in the dark so that the industry continues to exist and flourish?
It's a very, very good question because there's a reason that television is called the idiot box. Because the general assumption is that television viewers, we dumb down the news so that they understand everything, it's very easily digestible. That's the conventional wisdom. Yeah. That's the conventional wisdom, right? But it depends completely on the news organization of how they want to treat their viewers, right? Are you going to just give a perspective? Are you going to completely dumb down the news? The point is that it should be easily accessible to a larger number of people. For instance, if a Hindi news channel is trying to reach across to people who are not literate, I'm not literate, I mean literally who don't know how to read and write, how are they going to make their news engaging for that individual? Or not just Hindi, any regional channel for that matter. So they may actually choose to explain all the facts, put across all the situations that are there before them, and make it in a very, very easy to understand manner that even a child or a teenager watching that particular news broadcast may understand the news. Now, is this desirable? Is it not desirable? I think every news channel has a right to do that. But I can tell you that in my experience, I think viewers are pretty intelligent, and when you get into the facts and explain a story or a controversy for them, and you explain the legal provisions that are there, the precedents that are there, I think people do understand. And it's a choice that every news organization makes. I don't think there's one broad approach that one has to take in this. It is a choice that every news person, as a journalist, as a reporter, as an anchor, as an organization, it's just a individual choice and your gut feeling as to whether you need to explain this point, to what extent you need to explain this point, and if you actually dumb it down too much, you'll also end up sounding very repetitive, or you may end up boring people who actually know more. So there's always that balance that you have to keep as well.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Madhav. Please.
Thank you.
On behalf of the Times School of Media, I would like to express our sincere appreciation to Mr. Madhavdas Gopalkrishnan for his insightful guest lecture. Your expertise in the field of journalism provided us with a comprehensive understanding of the industry's current state and future trajectory. Your emphasis on the significance of critical thinking and the burgeoning field of data and mobile journalism has inspired our students to explore new avenues within the profession. Additionally, your candid discussion of the challenges faced by journalists today has fostered a deeper appreciation for the complexities of the role. We are grateful for your willingness to share your knowledge and experience with us. We hope to have the opportunity to learn from you again in the future. I would now like to request our Dean to extend our token of appreciation to the guest.